In the words of Frank Sinatra, it was a very good year. The year I'm referring to is 1955. McDonald's, Ray Kroc would start the food restaurant chain. Mickey Mouse Club would debut on ABC. You all remember it. MICKEYMOUSE. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would lead the bus boycott, the first major event of the civil rights movement. But there was one event that the world has no recollection of. This was the year that my grandfather would make his way from Shelby, Mississippi to Los Angeles, California. A 17-year-old sharecropper in search of a better life and opportunity used his $1 an hour sharecropper wages to purchase a Greyhound ticket that will land him in downtown Los Angeles to live with his aunt. He would get a job at a box factory and later at a car wash. But one day, while standing at a bus stop, a gentleman pulled over and said, "You look like a young man who wants a job." He immediately hopped into the car, and the gentleman took him to the dealership where he worked. He walked him into a supervisor's office, and just like that, he was hired as the new car detailer. My grandfather and this gentleman developed a great relationship over the years. Needless to say, this gentleman was really impressed with my grandfather. He worked hard to prove himself day in and day out. And still, to this day, this story resonates with me. Fast forward, 1965, my grandfather would be laid off several times from an aerospace company. And there was one day he realized his full potential. And he said to himself, "I never want to be laid off again. I want to be in control of my own destiny." He would go on to print business cards and go door to door and eventually land 4 contracts that started his own cleaning business. My grandfather is now 83, and believe it or not, he retired 3 years ago at the age of 80. And that gentleman that I mentioned that pulled over at the bus stop in his beautiful blue Buick, that was my great-great-uncle that raised me from the age of 6 months old. So you're probably asking, what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that my uncle gave my grandfather an opportunity to thrive. My uncle, he gave my grandfather boots. Boots were not only made for walking, but indeed, they were made for thriving. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best. It's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Boots in the context of civil rights, it means opportunity, it means equity and upward mobility. It means a shot at generational wealth, new money, and financial freedom. See, my grandfather, he didn't want a handout. He just simply wanted a hand up. My uncle, on the other hand, he understood the necessity of economic opportunity. My grandfather wanted a better life. He wanted to change his trajectory. But there was one thing that my grandfather had, and that was hope. And in the words of President Obama, hope springs eternal. And this is what inspires my work at ESROC. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Ferguson, and I'm the co-founder and president of ESROC Brain Trust Association. I'm a husband, father, minister, workforce development practitioner with the personal mission to help others realize their full potential. It was April 2012 when I realized my full potential. That's when I decided to pursue my MBA. I was 1 year into the MBA program, 3 months into a new job, and my manager told me that I had to choose between work or school. No one should ever have to make this type of decision. But the reality is, Black and brown people have to make this decision every day. Should I continue to work and live paycheck to paycheck, hoping that ends will meet? But the reality is, ends don't meet, they just end. Or can I buy enough time to pursue my education to change my trajectory? This was the hardest decision I've ever made in my entire life. I had to go home and tell my wife, the mother of my 2 children, that I was walking away from my job. I tendered my resignation and completed my MBA program in 2014. We didn't know how we would pay our bills. We didn't know how we would put food on the table. We had no savings, absolutely no backup. But it was that moment where I chose faith and not fear. And there's a moment in everyone's life where we have to choose faith and not fear. SROC Brain Trust Association is excited to deploy programming in Leimert Park to provide economic opportunity, growth, and sustainability to underserved communities. And we want to start right here in Leimert Park. Imagine local churches coming together to put their resources to action, to acquire assets that will build wealth. This type of program can be the springboard for Black men and women to realize and reach their full potential. This is the new American dream, the relief of college student debt and achieving financial security. And in this climate, not to mention making sure our Black boys and Black girls, Black men and women, they all make it home safe. Crenshaw is very unique in a sense. 1.8 miles separate one of the wealthiest African American communities. But this has started to look different because of gentrification. Generational wealth has been lost because of joblessness and the lack of financial education. But to turn things around, we're calling on churches and religious institutions to come together to leverage their resources to expedite this possibility. Los Angeles, gosh, it's a huge place. It's a place of shiny things, and it's much bigger than Hollywood. But believe me, it has its challenges. According to the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, South LA has some of the worst outcomes as it relates to physical and social determinants of health. Unemployment, homelessness, and poor air quality. And in response to this, Project Bethany, our flagship strategy, our blueprint, will combat chronic unemployment, eradicate financial illiteracy, and mitigate unhealthy city conditions. Project Bethany, it's much more than a blueprint. It's much more than a comprehensive strategy. It's a set of standard operating procedures that can guide, measure, and produce outcomes around economic and environmental resiliency. Project Bethany sites will house our programs and initiatives. Project Bethany sites will deliver curriculum around digital and financial literacy, workforce development programming, student engagement, and many others. But most importantly, equip churches and religious institutions to be energy efficient and environmentally sustainable. And in the words of our co-founder and chief thought officer, Shahid Ali Il, churches and religious institutions must be the first responders in underserved communities to respond to disaster and hardship. Churches and religious institutions will be our Project Bethany sites. They'll deliver the programs, and in addition to that, their information will be accessible on our website for community members, parishioners to take advantage of our services. And upon completion of the program, each participant will receive a toolkit of sustainable products to take home to reduce their carbon footprint. This is the big idea. Imagine cities and states duplicating this program, bringing this program to underrepresented communities to change their trajectory. This is something worth getting excited about. Now, as I mentioned, my grandfather was ambitious, but he only had a 7th grade education. But there was one thing that he had, and that was a vision. Now, don't get me wrong, education, yes, indeed, it's critically important. But without perseverance, dedication, and lifelong learning, education is inertia. W.E.B. Du Bois said it best: education is that whole system of human training within and without the schoolhouse walls that can mold and develop men. My grandfather wanted to be molded. He wanted to be developed. He wanted to change his trajectory. And because of that burning desire, he and my grandmother changed the trajectory of their children, changed my trajectory, and has given me the inspiration to change the trajectory for my children. And through our work at ESROC Brain Trust Association, we want to change the trajectory of underserved communities. We believe that we can provide boots to our community, literally and figuratively. We believe that boots are the key for stronger communities, for stronger families, and stronger churches. We believe at ESROC that we are indeed the next boot on the ground. We can provide these opportunities through churches and religious institutions. So really the big audacious question here is, who will you give boots to? Will you help us to help others get the boots that they rightfully deserve? Will you help us to help others live the new American dream? Thank you.